It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Kyiv this evening, where this time last year, Vladimir Putin was about to launch his illegal invasion of Ukraine. As we mark that milestone, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson tells Sky News British security is at risk unless Ukraine wins and warns Beijing against arming Moscow.
This is an absolutely critical moment for the world. This is a pivot moment. This is a hinge of fate. This is the decisive moment in the early 21st century.
Sky News learns how the Prime Minister is being urged to boost military spending to rebuild ammunition stores. And tonight, the United Nations votes overwhelmingly to demand Russia withdraws from Ukraine, but China and India abstain.
Also coming up tonight on Sky News at 10, police in Northern Ireland arrest 3 men in connection with the shooting of a senior detective attacked in front of his young son.
The heinous attack on John Caldwell last night involved not just John, but also our children. So those people showed no humanity and they attacked our children.
A man on a mission, Sir Keir Starmer sets out his key targets if Labour wins the next general election.
First of all, they thought it was a knee injury. Then somebody said Zagallo had dropped him. Then it was all a mistake. And then we were told it was definitely true. And then suddenly, here's the new team sheet.
And the tributes to John Motson, one of football's most distinctive voices, following his death at the age of 77. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:40.
Good evening from Kyiv in Ukraine and welcome to a specially extended version of Sky News at 10, just a few hours away from the anniversary of the Russian invasion of this country. Vladimir Putin's actions have threatened the stability of Europe and caused shockwaves around the world, but Ukraine has remained defiant against the odds, with allies pledging their unwavering support. Tonight, Whitehall sources have told Sky News the UK is reviewing the size of its ammunition stockpiles amid concern that they are far too small. And I've returned to Saltivka in Kharkiv to see how the lives of those there have been ruined by a year of war. But first, in an exclusive interview for Sky News, Boris Johnson has told me the UK should provide President Zelensky with Typhoon fighter jets. He also warned Beijing not to support Moscow and said defeat for Ukraine would spell disaster for the rest of the world.
The astonishing thing about where we are today is nobody thought that the Ukrainians were going to hold out for a week, if you remember, let alone a year, or very few people thought they would resist in the heroic way that they have. And it's absolutely crucial that we give them the supplies, the support they need to get on and finish it. This 2023 has got to be the year of victory for Ukraine. That's the best thing for Ukraine. By the way, it's the best thing for the Russian people. It's the best thing for the world. It's the humane thing, and let's get on with it.
Should the UK and other NATO countries be on a war footing? Because who knows where this war is going to lead?
I don't know what you exactly mean by a war footing, Mark. What I'm saying is that we should continue to supply the munitions that we can. We should continue to make more munitions, and we should recognise, when you talk about the expense, we should recognise that what we're doing now is actually making sure that we are able to save money, save defence expenditure in the long term. Because as we just discussed, the risk of any kind of success by Vladimir Putin is that our general security would be much more gravely imperiled. That's why it's essential to do what we're doing now.
If Rishi Sunak doesn't significantly increase defence spending in the next budget, would he be failing as a wartime leader?
Well, there's a couple of sort of ifs there, Mark, and I think that I pay tribute to the government, the Prime Minister, Defence Secretary, what they're continuing to do, and the UK remains way out in front. It's one of the big donors to Ukraine, not just of humanitarian assistance, but of that crucial military assistance. And what I'm saying now is that when it comes to things like fighter jets. Of course, what the Ukrainians want is F-16s. As it happens, we don't have F-16s, we do have Typhoons. I think there's an argument for the UK breaking the ice and giving them some Typhoons. If it's a question of training people up to use those machines, then we can do that.
Well, what would the consequences be, do you think, if China actively supported Russia in this war by supplying weaponry?
I think it would be a historic mistake by the Chinese. I was very concerned to see what Wang Yi was doing yesterday in Moscow. I think, you know, it would be a big mistake. Why does China want to be contaminated by association with Putin, who's revealed himself to be this gangster and adventurer? I think it would be a big mistake by China. But what it shows is the urgency of us giving the Ukrainians what they need to succeed this year and to make sure that 2023 is the year of victory.
The Ukrainian Prime Minister said today to Sky News that if Ukraine loses the war, if Putin wins, it could well lead to a third world war. Do you agree?
Well, I think the stakes are very high. I think that in the sense, as we discussed earlier, I just think there is a real risk that if Putin can manufacture any kind of success out of this, then he will be able to continue to threaten not just Ukraine, the rest of Ukraine, but all the parts of the former Soviet empire that he wants to intimidate. And everybody else around the world will draw the conclusion, Mark, that aggression pays off and that borders can be changed by force. This is an absolutely critical moment for the world. This is a pivot moment. This is a hinge of fate. This is the decisive moment in the early 21st century. If Ukraine wins, and I think Ukraine will win, and I know Ukraine can win with our help, then that will be absolutely critical for our security for decades to come. If, on the other hand, as you say, Putin is able to manufacture some kind of victory, I think that will be a blow for peace, stability, and for prosperity.
Boris Johnson there speaking to me a little earlier. Well, Sky News has learned that the UK is reviewing the size of its ammunition stockpiles because Russia's invasion of Ukraine has shown them to be far too small. Sources within Whitehall have urged the Prime Minister to boost military spending to fund a major expansion in ammunition and weapons stores, but say they fear Rishi Sunak isn't interested in defence, a claim Downing Street denies. Sky's security and defence editor Deborah Haynes has this report.
Western weapons in eastern Ukraine. They're evening up the battlefield for Ukrainian troops against Russia's much larger army. But neither side stocks are infinite, and a race is on to see who can rearm fastest. On Ukraine's front line near the city of Bakhmut, a soldier explains how this makeshift cover protects his gun from Russian suicide drones. He also talks about the need to preserve ammunition.
Амуніція вона так як є, а сили і засоби ми, звичайно, що бережемо. Десь трошки менше стріляємо. Але загалом завдання, які поставлені для нашого виконання, ми робимо.
Yet the rate of artillery fire over the past year has been greater than at any time since the Korean War. A Ukrainian officer has told Sky News that Russia had been firing 60,000 to 70,000 shells a day, a level that's about halved as supplies ran down. US officials have put that top rate at around 20,000 a day, but also say it's dropped. Ukraine, by contrast, has been firing 5,000 to 6,000 rounds daily. As for the impact, Russia has lost around 9,000 pieces of military equipment, such as armoured vehicles and artillery, 3 times more than Ukraine. With its tanks, missiles and generosity, The UK is one of the Ukrainian military's most important suppliers. But for how long? I've been told Britain is reviewing the size of its ammunition stockpiles because Russia's invasion here has exposed how past assumptions on what would be needed to fight a war were far too conservative. My sources say Rishi Sunak must increase defence spending to fund a massive expansion in ammunition and weapons stores, or risk being unable to keep supporting Ukraine at the level needed. Rebuilding the UK's military strength after decades of cuts is also critical. The Prime Minister talked tough when he hosted Vladimir Zelensky this month. But one Whitehall source accused Mr Sunak of having no interest in defence and security. Those charged with that in number 10 can barely get access to him. The President Zelensky visit was engaged with late and with only peripheral, passing interest. If it's not domestic or economic, it doesn't feature. A second source said, he's a financier and simply can't understand these things. A government spokesperson said, these claims are baseless and untrue. It was the Prime Minister who, as Chancellor, agreed the 2020 spending review that provided the Ministry of Defence with the largest increase in defence investment since the Cold War. The Prime Minister is clear that we will do everything necessary to protect our people, which is why our armed forces will always have the equipment and capability they need. Of course, the UK is only one of many countries arming Ukraine, but dwindling stockpiles is a common theme that needs fixing, so the troops can keep firing. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kyiv.
Now, the UN General Assembly has voted to pass a resolution demanding Russia unconditionally and immediately withdraw from Ukraine, but China and India are among a small group of countries who have abstained. US correspondent Mark Stone is at the UN in New York. So, well, Mark, in reality, what does all this mean?
Well, by the faces of the Western diplomats inside that building late this afternoon, they are very, very pleased. There were 32 abstentions, China among them, of course. There were 7 who voted against, the usual suspects, North Korea, Syria, Iran, Belarus, voting with Russia. But 141 of the 193 countries that stand in this building, that are members of the United Nations, voted for this resolution. Now, what does it tell us? Yes, it's symbolic. No, it is not binding, but it tells us that the global resolve against Russia and its aggression is overwhelming and has sustained over the course of the past year. Mark, it was exactly a year ago tonight that the Security Council of the United Nations was meeting, calling for Russia not to invade Ukraine, and President Putin chose that precise moment to go on state television in Russia and announce that he was doing that he was going to invade, and so he did. It was a neat 2 fingers to this institution and to the global order that it represents. And I think what we will see tomorrow is that while global resolve is against Putin, Russia still has a hold over the United Nations and therefore a hold over all of this, because it has the power of veto. And when the Security Council meets tomorrow, Russia will be around that table, and we will hear once again Russia's alternate reality in terms of what the past year has represented.
Yeah, we certainly will. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Now, throughout the past year, the city of Kharkiv has come under almost constant bombardment. Worst hit, the area of Saltivka, just 20 miles from the Russian border. We have been back there to meet the few remaining people enduring extraordinary hardship and who fear that it could all soon happen again. A year on, and Saltivka remains a broken place. Broken buildings, broken infrastructure, and in the grip of this cruel winter, broken people. Anatoly Limarenko has a face worn by war. He is 61 years old, and he is the only person still living in his badly damaged 9-story block of flats. It is a hard climb to the 7th floor place he still calls home. It is scarcely that.
So it's cold. It's really cold.
He has gas to cook and soup to keep him going, but there is no heating, no hot water, and the toilet doesn't work because the cistern water froze and it cracked. But despite it all, he stays. I have nowhere else to go, he says. It's scary to be on your own, but when there is no shelling, it's bearable.
3 kilometers stand Russian, and they bomb here during the days, during the night.
Just after war began, we met Roman in Soltivka, ferrying supplies to the desperate here between bombardments. He is still doing it. These women show us the flats destroyed by Russian fire, where missiles went through the floor and where the lives of neighbours came to an end. And living next door to the burnt-out shell of an apartment, we found 71-year-old Nelia Chuba, who has often thought about leaving, but instead stays with her bedridden husband, Petro. They do at least have heating in this block, but her fear is that the Russians will try again to take the city. This place represents Putin's war not against the Ukrainian military, but against the Ukrainian people. 40,000 people lived here. Now it is barely a handful, and for them, the conditions are desperate. We leave Anatoly sitting watching jazz on a television with barely a signal. This is what war has done to Soltivka, to its few remaining people, to the spirit of what they say used to be a happy place. And that is about it from Ukraine for this evening. We will, of course, have full coverage throughout the day tomorrow. Now back to you in London.
Mark, thank you. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell is in a critical condition in hospital in Northern Ireland tonight. He'd been coaching football with his son and other children at a sports centre when 2 gunmen attacked him. 3 men have been arrested in connection with the shooting in Omagh, and the focus of the investigation is now on the new IRA and dissident Republicans. Stephen Murphy reports.
This is a major police operation to find those who tried to assassinate their colleague. Often seen leading press conferences, this is Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell, a senior and well-respected murder detective.
This follows the results of the post-mortem.
After coaching an under-15 football team at this sports complex, he was putting footballs into his car when he was attacked and shot multiple times by 2 gunmen in front of his young son. Dozens of other children were present. They ran terrified for cover as the attackers fled. The investigation quickly focused on the new IRA. 3 men were arrested today as John Caldwell's colleagues paid tribute.
He is a credit to his family and to the police service. And of course, our thoughts are with John and his family as he fights for his life in hospital today.
John Caldwell is a past pupil of Omagh High School, and around 15 young pupils from the school witnessed his attempted murder. Some were just meters away when gunfire erupted.
Some kids were obviously shocked, still shocked, and they looked numb and they didn't know what to say. They are worried about him and his health and how he is coping in hospital. There's pupils in the background that are crying and they're very emotional about what happened last night and they cannot cope.
The school is no stranger to tragedy. 5 pupils here died in the Omagh bombing. It's sheer luck more names aren't being added to the memorial.
That heinous attack on John Caldwell last night involved not just John, but also our children. So those people showed no humanity and they attacked our children.
It was, the Secretary of State said, a cowardly and callous attack.
Everybody in the policing community and actually the community of Omagh is completely shocked by this because society has moved on in Northern Ireland. There is no place for violence like this.
Condemnation too from across the local political divide.
There's no support for violence here within the local Omagh or Killyclogher area. The people don't want to return to the violence of the past. We're looking for a brighter and better future ahead.
Someone who was liked and respected by all of the community, entire community in this area, and I think that is why that you have so much anger and outrage.
DCI Caldwell investigated the dissident murder of his colleague Ronan Kerr more than a decade ago. He told reporters that no one deserves to be murdered because of how they earn their living. Those that seek to drag Northern Ireland back to a darker time sought to do just that. Stephen Murphy, Sky News, Omagh.
A security threat against police officers in Northern Ireland has continued since the end of the Troubles, but attacks are now much rarer. Detectives are treating the parliamentary group, the New IRA, as the primary focus of their investigation. They shot and killed the journalist Lyra McKee during riots in 2019. As we approach the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, this latest shooting is a harsh reminder that the risk of violence hasn't disappeared. Here's our Ireland correspondent, David Blevins.
From car bombs to gun attacks to the attempted murder of another police officer, there's nothing new about the New IRA. The umbrella name for renegade Irish Republican factions, still fighting the same old war against British rule in Ireland. Alison Morris, the Belfast Telegraph's crime correspondent, says they have been heavily infiltrated by MI5.
That is why we've seen the threat level in Northern Ireland last year lowered, because MI5's assessment was that they had been almost mortally wounded in terms of their ability to carry out attacks. But we always say, you know, and those groups always say they only have to get lucky once, whereas the security forces have to get lucky every single time to thwart those attacks. And I don't think that anyone had anticipated an attack such as what happened on DCI Caldwell.
Dissident Republicans have murdered policemen, soldiers and prison officers. The journalist Lyra McKee was killed when they opened fire on police during a riot. Police north and south say the terror group has aligned with the Firm, an unlikely alliance of terrorists and criminals. It's a complex and nuanced security situation, adding to the challenge of post-Brexit tensions and threatening the fragile peace. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister who co-brokered the Good Friday Agreement, is calling for leadership.
How capable are the political leaders of today of grasping the nuances of Northern Ireland and helping to resolve it?
If they think the peace has been a good thing, remember this one principle, which is actually a principle about leadership. It only came about because of leadership. It only came about because there were leaders prepared to be unpopular, even with their own grassroots constituency or part of it. And it only came about because there were leaders with the creativity and the imagination to say whatever the obstacles, we're going to find a way through it, and they found it.
It's a chilling reminder of why policing in Northern Ireland is different to anywhere else in the United Kingdom. The fears of the past are never far from the hopes of the future. David Blevins, Sky News in Belfast.
Boris Johnson has made an intervention over Northern Ireland, casting doubt on Rishi Sunak's attempts to renegotiate a post-Brexit trade deal and questioning the Prime Minister's whole approach. There's been no power-sharing devolved government at Stormont for over a year now after talks broke down.
I think the best way forward, as I said when I was running the government, is the Northern Ireland Bill. It fixes all the problems. It solves the problems that we have in the Irish Sea. It solves the problems of paperwork, VAT, and so on. It's an excellent bill and doesn't set up any other problems in the economy of the whole island of Ireland.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is in Downing Street for us tonight. And Sam, what impact do you think Boris Johnson's comments will have?
Well, I think this is perhaps the most destabilising set of comments that Boris Johnson has made as an ex-Prime Minister at one of the most delicate moments for Rishi Sunak. What the former Prime Minister is doing is arguing that perhaps Rishi Sunak's entire approach to Brexit and Northern Ireland is misguided, and that far from negotiating with Brussels, he's suggesting that might cause problems. He's saying that actually what Rishi Sunak should do is just continue through Parliament with his legislation that would allow the UK to rip up unilaterally parts of the Brexit deal. And he says that would solve all the problems that there are at the moment with Brexit and Northern Ireland. A lot of people would disagree with that, suggest that there are quite a lot of risks attached to unilaterally ripping up a treaty, but that's what Boris Johnson is doing. And he's doing so at this very sensitive moment for really quite some time, some months now. Rishi Sunak and his team have been negotiating with Brussels to try and solve some of those issues in Northern Ireland when it comes to trade, when it comes to who is in control of the laws and sovereignty. And he's quite close to coming back with a deal. Now, he hasn't publicly said what's in it, but we at Sky News know. We've put them in the public domain this week, and they're building up quite a head of opposition. And now the man in the building behind me, they've got to decide whether to press ahead with this plan, publish it and try and pass it, or whether to pause it, renegotiate, or whether to abandon it altogether because the opposition is just too much. And it's against that backdrop that Boris Johnson's criticisms have been made. And it doesn't help Rishi Sunak one bit. He will not be thanking Boris Johnson for tonight's interview with Mark Austin.
Sam, thank you. Sir Keir Starmer has laid out his vision for government, pledging to give the country its future back. The Labour leader promised that if his party wins the next general election, the UK would have the fastest growing economy in the G7 by the end of his first term in office. Making a speech in Manchester, he said it was part of 5 missions that he would prioritise in power. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Pitching a path to power. A general election sometime off, but the campaign now very much on.
I didn't realise we're going to have all the people up on the other floors.
This a leader on the up in polls, now laying down his plans for office.
Mission-driven government. An answer to the widespread call to fix the fundamentals. A long-term plan to unlock our pride and our purpose. A profound statement of intent.
5 missions to grow the economy and improve opportunities, become a clean energy powerhouse, improve the NHS and make our streets safe. But will it cut through?
People want their country to work, but can you honestly say that your blue sky thinking, rather than clear specific policies such as cutting working people's taxes or ensuring that they'll get a hospital appointment, is in any way relatable?
You're quite right to say, look, what are you going to do about the NHS this winter? What are you going to do about energy bills this spring? But the problem if we stop there with that sort of retail offer for the here and now is that we'll never fix the fundamentals. We've had 13 years of sticking plaster politics. We've had 13 years of going round and round in circles.
People here have an appetite for change, but they're not yet sure what that looks like.
He's keeping everything vague enough that it, ticks all the boxes without actually, cementing a position.
Do you sort of feel you know what he stands for?
Not particularly.
You think Starmer's better for the Labour Party?
There's more chance of getting elected than Corbyn.
It doesn't matter what you do then or who you vote for, like nothing will change.
Yeah, 100%.
So you don't trust any politicians?
No, not at all.
And that lack of trust is hurting the Conservatives. Labour are now 25 plus points ahead in the polls, not necessarily because people like Labour, but rather they seem to dislike this Conservative government. And Sir Keir Starmer is now trying to begin to seal the deal with voters. These 5 missions will form the skeleton of the next Labour manifesto. But what it all boils down to is still so very vague. There's still no meat on the bones when it comes to either policy or priorities. He can't quite believe his luck. After suffering the worst election defeat since 1935, bringing Labour back must have felt like mission impossible. But there's still some way to go yet. Beth Rigby, Sky News in Manchester.
For the first time, some asylum seekers will not be required to attend a face-to-face interview to have their applications heard as the government attempts to tackle the backlog of cases. It comes as the asylum backlog has reached a record high. The latest figures show the numbers of people waiting for a decision hit 160,919 in the year to December 2022. Now, asylum seekers from 5 countries, Afghanistan, Eritrea, Libya, Syria and Yemen, who applied before July 2022, will have their cases decided through a 10-page questionnaire rather than through an in-person interview. The Home Office says it's because more than 95% of asylum claims from those countries are accepted. Well, that's 12,000 people being fast-tracked through the asylum system. Our Communities correspondent Lisa Holland reports.
This is a food bank in the West Midlands where the vast majority of recipients are asylum seekers. It's set up to support people whilst they wait for their claims to be processed. For some, that can mean years trapped in a buckling system, unable to officially work or move on with their lives. As we film, watch the face of the man on the left, 18-year-old Hossam Batha. As a translator explains, he fits the cohort of people whose applications will now be fast-tracked. Hossam is from Syria and arrived in July 2021.
So you've actually just broken the news to this man. Yeah. And actually, I've just seen his face change. He's smiling now.
He's here, her dream. He can live in this country in peace.
But the list of 5 countries has left others like Bara Majara and his 7-year-old son bitterly disappointed. They are from Iran, which has seen major anti-government protests.
I escaped from there because of my religion. I'm Christian. So they don't like me, or there is not really a freedom of religion, or that's why I left Iran.
It means the fear of a separate Home Office asylum strategy still hangs over others we meet. Iraqi Kurd Kamal Hassan says his son lives in fear of his parents being sent to Rwanda.
Same, Iraq and Afghanistan, same. My government's no good.
Those who are eligible for the new policy will have to fill out a 10-page questionnaire rather than an in-person interview.
If people don't have the right help to fill in the forms, there would be a slight concern that might prejudice the outcome. But, overall, if there's a fast-tracking system, that is to be welcomed.
The Prime Minister has pledged to cut the backlog of asylum seekers, but new figures show nearly 161,000 claims are still awaiting processing, a record number. Critics describe the announcement as an amnesty in all but name. Others say it speeds up claims which would almost certainly be approved. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
The football commentator John Motson has died at the age of 77. His unmistakable distinctive voice and sheepskin coat accompanied thousands of matches and saw him cover 10 World Cups. Affectionately known as Motti, he was admired for his enthusiasm and ability to capture the excitement on the pitch in a career which spanned 50 years. Rob Harris looks back at the life of a legendary figure in British sports broadcasting.
And there it is! The crazy gang have beaten the Culture Club.
You could see the winners. Why it mattered so much was John Motson summoning the words for the occasion.
That's a fantastic quote, and one I think which will live with Wimbledon fans forever.
Feeling the emotion and enthusiasm of Wimbledon's FA Cup euphoria. 35 years on, his commentary endures for fans.
What a typical Wimbledon goal!
The sheepskin coat, the microphone, people have grown up with him. They've been used to him covering big matches, and sometimes cup finals, England games just won't be the same without hearing his voice.
For 5 decades, Motson was the voice of football on the BBC.
Radford.
He voiced game-changing moments, and those moments changed him.
Radford again. Oh, what a goal! What a goal!
A 1972 FA Cup replay was handed to the junior television commentator.
The crowd are invading the pitch.
When lowly Hereford shocked Newcastle, it elevated Motson's fledgling career.
Hold the cups and the glasses back home.
He would be the voice of 29 FA Cup finals and cover 10 World Cups.
You can smash them now. Beckham has scored for England.
Motson grew in an era without daily live games, with a handful of channels and fewer commentators.
Villiers. And still Ricky Villiers. What a fantastic run. He scored!
Making live assignments even more coveted.
Reese's cross. Oh, it's 4 minutes. Gerrard! He's got it!
I mean, it was competitive, and we both did our best, and his best worked out to be better than my best. He will be remembered as the man with the finest record of commentary on the game of football that's existed. The figures absolutely prove that, and he deserves every compliment that will be offered to him.
That gentleman with the white hair is a Brighton season ticket holder, and he also happens to be a local clergyman and father of the commentator.
John Motson's tip was talk little, say a lot. He always found the right words. Commentary living as long in the memory as the moment he was the soundtrack to. Rob Harris, Sky News.